The morning Penelope Jensen found her husband frozen to death in their barn was the same morning she realized how alone a woman could be in the Wyoming territory, even with neighbors just 3 miles down the road. She had woken before dawn on that November morning in 1877, reaching across the bed to find Thomas's side cold and empty. Nothing unusual about that. He often rose early to check on the livestock when winter storms threatened. But when she pulled back the curtain and saw the world buried under 3 feet of snow, everything changed. The blizzard had come in the night, silent and deadly, transforming their small ranch outside Hamilton into an endless expanse of white. Penelope dressed quickly, her breath visible in the frigid air inside the cabin. The fire had died sometime during the night, and the cold had seeped through every crack in the walls. She pulled on Thomas's old coat over her own and wrapped a scarf around her face before stepping outside. The wind had stopped, leaving an eerie stillness that made the snow crunch loudly under her boots. The barn door stood partially open, snow drifting inside. Her heart began to pound as she pushed through the drift that had formed against the entrance. The darkness inside took a moment for her eyes to adjust to, and then she saw him. Thomas lay crumpled near the far stall, his body covered in a thin layer of snow that had blown through the gaps in the barn walls. She knew before she reached him, before she touched his frozen hand, that he was gone. Penelope dropped to her knees beside him, her voice catching in her throat. No scream came. No tears, just a hollow emptiness that seemed to match the vast white landscape outside. Thomas Jensen had been her husband for 3 years, since she was 19 and he was 25. He had not been a warm man, but he had been steady, reliable. He had offered her a life away from her aunt's crowded house in Missouri, and she had accepted without much thought to love or romance. Now he was gone, and she was alone with 2 horses, 4 cows, a dozen chickens, and a ranch she had no idea how to manage through a Wyoming winter. She could not move him alone. She could not even get him to the house. The realization settled over her like the snow outside, cold and heavy. She covered him with a horse blanket, the only dignity she could offer for now, and made her way back to the cabin. Inside, she rebuilt the fire with shaking hands. The wood supply was running low. Everything was running low. Thomas had meant to make a trip to town the week before, but he had put it off, saying the weather would hold a few more days. He had been wrong. Penelope sat by the fire, staring at the flames, trying to make sense of what came next. She needed help. She needed to get Thomas buried properly. She needed supplies. But the snow outside was too deep for the horses to navigate, and she could not leave the animals unattended even if she could make the journey to town on foot. 3 days passed. 3 days of rationing food, of melting snow for water, of feeding the animals and avoiding the barn's far corner where Thomas lay under the blanket. She kept expecting someone to come check on them, but the storm had isolated everyone. The snow remained too deep, the temperature too bitter. On the 4th day, she heard a sound that made her heart leap. Hoofbeats, slow and steady, crunching through the snow. She rushed to the window and saw a figure on horseback approaching the cabin. A man, tall in the saddle, leading a pack horse behind him. He wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the glare of sun on snow. Penelope grabbed Thomas's rifle from above the door and stepped outside, keeping the weapon lowered but visible. A woman alone could not be too careful, even in her desperation for help. The man reined in his horse about 20 feet from the cabin. He raised one hand in a gesture of peace, the other resting easy on his saddle horn. "Madam," he called out, his voice deep and steady. "Name is Vincent Sawyer. I am making my way through checking on folks after the storm." "Everything all right here?" She wanted to laugh at the question, but her throat was too tight. "My husband is dead," she said, and the words sounded strange in her own ears. The first time she had said them aloud. "He is in the barn, I cannot move him." Vincent Sawyer dismounted immediately, his movements careful and deliberate. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 27 or 28, with dark hair visible beneath his hat, and a face weathered by sun and wind. "I am sorry for your loss, madam. Let me help you." She led him to the barn, watching as he knelt beside Thomas's body. He was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at her. "How long?" "4 days now, since the night of the storm." He nodded slowly, his gray eyes serious. "Ground is too frozen to dig. We will need to take him to town. The undertaker has a cold storage shed for winter deaths." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "You cannot stay here alone, Mrs. Jensen, not through winter, not without help." "I have nowhere else to go," Penelope said simply. It was the truth. Her parents were dead. Her aunt's house was already overcrowded, and this ranch, small as it was hers now. All she had in the world. Vincent stood, brushing snow from his knees. "Let me get him loaded onto my pack horse. Then we will talk about what comes next." She watched as he worked, his movements efficient and respectful. He was strong, handling Thomas's frozen body with a care that made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. This stranger was showing her dead husband more tenderness than Thomas had shown her in 3 years of marriage. Once Thomas was secured on the pack horse, Vincent turned to her. "You have family in town?" "No. Friends who could take you in." "Not really. We kept to ourselves mostly." He was quiet for a moment, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Jensen, and I want you to know I mean no disrespect by it. But these are practical times and they call for practical solutions." Penelope wrapped her arms around herself, waiting. "I have a ranch about 7 miles west of here. Bigger spread than this, with a proper house and a winter's worth of supplies. I have been working it alone since my partner moved back east last spring. I could use help, and you need a place to weather the winter. I am proposing a business arrangement. You come work for me, keep the house, help with meals and such. In return, you get room and board, and I will make sure your place here does not fall to ruin. Come spring, if you want to come back here, I will help you get established. If you want to sell, I will help with that too." She stared at him, trying to read his intentions. "Why would you help me?" "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I could use the help. Winter is long and lonely in Wyoming, Mrs. Jensen. I am not proposing anything improper. You would have your own room, your own space. I just figure we could both benefit from the arrangement." It was insane. Going to live with a stranger, a man she had met 10 minutes ago. But what choice did she have? Stay here alone and likely freeze or starve before spring. Try to make it to town with no money and no prospects. "I would need to bring some of my things," she said slowly. "And my laying hens. They are good birds." Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "We can manage that. Get what you need. I will tend to your other livestock and bring them over tomorrow." 2 hours later, Penelope was sitting beside Vincent Sawyer on his wagon, her trunk of belongings and a crate of chickens in the back, heading west through the snow toward a future she could not begin to imagine. Thomas's body had been taken to the undertaker in Hamilton, and the small cabin that had been her home was locked up behind her. Vincent did not talk much as they drove, for which she was grateful. She was too numb, too overwhelmed to make conversation. He seemed to sense this, only speaking to point out landmarks or to warn her about a rough patch in the road. His ranch, when they finally reached it, was indeed bigger than hers had been. The house was a proper 2-story structure, painted white with green trim, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. The barn was substantial, and she could see other outbuildings through the snow. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting he had hired help or someone keeping house. "I have a man named Charlie who helps with the heavy work," Vincent explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "He bunks in the barn and keeps to himself mostly. Good worker. He knows you are coming." He carried her trunk inside, and Penelope followed, her chickens left for the moment in their crate on the porch. The interior of the house was warm and clean, simply furnished but comfortable. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a worn sofa, 2 chairs, and a dining table. She could see a kitchen through one doorway and stairs leading up through another. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Vincent said, setting her trunk down. "My room is at the end of the hall. There is a spare room between, gives us both privacy. Privy is out back, but I keep a chamber pot in each room for night or when the weather is bad. Water pump is in the kitchen." Penelope nodded, taking it all in. It was nicer than anywhere she had lived since leaving Missouri. "I will get your birds settled in the coop," Vincent continued. "You take your time getting situated. There is stew on the stove if you are hungry. I made it this morning before I headed out." "You cook?" The question was out before she could stop it. This time he definitely smiled, just a little. "Had to learn when my partner left. I am not fancy, but I manage. Though I would not complain if you wanted to take that over. My biscuits could be used as ammunition." Despite everything, despite the numbness and grief and fear, Penelope felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. "I can cook. Then we will get along just fine, Mrs. Jensen." He left her alone to explore her new surroundings. The room he had given her was simple but pleasant, with a real bed frame and mattress, a dresser, a washstand, and a window looking out over the snowy fields. It was more than she had expected. Much more. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, and finally let herself cry. For Thomas, for the life she had lost, for the fear and uncertainty ahead. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she washed her face in the cold water from the washstand and went downstairs to see about supper. Vincent came in an hour later, stomping snow from his boots at the door. The smell of baking bread filled the house, and he paused, inhaling deeply. "That smells better than anything I have managed in 6 months." Penelope was setting the table, trying to keep her hands busy. "It is just bread, nothing special." "It is special when you have been eating my cooking," he said, hanging his coat and hat by the door. He moved to the wash basin and cleaned up before sitting at the table. "Your hens are settled. They seem content enough." They ate in awkward silence at first, neither quite sure what to say. Finally, Vincent cleared his throat. "I want you to know, Mrs. Jensen, that you are safe here. I know this is a strange situation, but I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be treated with respect." "Thank you," she said quietly. "And you can call me Penelope. Mrs. Jensen seems too formal if we are going to be living under the same roof." "Penelope," he repeated, as if testing the name. "My friends call me Vince." "All right, Vince." They fell into a routine over the following days. Penelope rose early to make breakfast, and Vince would eat quickly before heading out to tend the cattle and horses with Charlie. She would spend her days cleaning, cooking, mending, and doing the 100 small tasks that came with keeping house. In the evenings, they would share supper and sometimes sit by the fire, not talking much but finding a comfortable silence between them. Thomas's funeral was held a week after his death, a small affair attended by a handful of neighbors and townspeople who braved the cold. Penelope stood dry-eyed through the service, Vince a steady presence at her side. She felt more like she was burying a distant relative than a husband, and the guilt of that sat heavy in her chest. Afterward, the local minister's wife approached her, a thin woman with kind eyes. "What will you do now, dear?" "I am working for Mr. Sawyer," Penelope said simply. "Keeping his house through the winter." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly, but she did not comment on the arrangement. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find us." As they drove back to the ranch, Vince glanced at her. "People will talk, you know, about you staying at my place." "I know. It bothers you," she considered this. "A week ago, I thought I knew what my life would be. Now everything has changed. What people think seems less important than surviving." He nodded, his hands steady on the reins. "That is a good way to look at it." December arrived with more snow and bitter cold. Penelope found herself grateful every day for the warmth and safety of Vince's house. She also found herself watching him more, noticing things. The way he was gentle with the animals. How he never raised his voice, even when frustrated. The quiet competence with which he handled everything from mending tack to fixing a broken window shutter. He was handsome too, though she tried not to dwell on that. Tall and broad-shouldered, with those gray eyes that seemed to see more than most people. When he smiled, which was rare but becoming more frequent, it transformed his whole face. She was a widow. She should not be noticing such things. But the heart, she was learning, did not always follow the rules of propriety. One evening in mid-December, a heavy snowstorm trapped them inside for 2 days. On the second day, restless from being confined, Vince taught her to play poker using matchsticks as currency. They sat at the kitchen table, the wind howling outside, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Penelope laughed. Really laughed at Vince's terrible bluffing and her own unexpected luck with the cards. "You are a card sharp," he accused, grinning at her across the table. "Pretending to be an innocent widow while cleaning me out of matchsticks." "I am an innocent widow," she protested, still laughing. "It is not my fault you have no poker face at all." "No poker face. I will have you know I won $3 off a trail boss in Cheyenne last year." "He must have been blind and drunk." Vince laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Probably both, come to think of it." The moment stretched between them, the laughter fading into something else, something that made Penelope's breath catch and her heart beat faster. Vince seemed to feel it too, his smile softening as he looked at her across the table. "I am glad you are here, Penelope," he said quietly. "I know the circumstances are terrible, but I am glad." "I am glad too," she admitted, the words barely a whisper. They went back to their card game, but something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed, and they both knew it. A few days later, Penelope was in the kitchen kneading bread when Vince came in from the barn earlier than usual. His face was troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked, wiping flour from her hands. "One of the mares is having trouble foaling. Charlie and I have been with her for hours, but the foal is not positioned right. I have sent Charlie to town to fetch the veterinarian, but with this snow it will take time." He paused. "I could use your help if you are willing." "Of course." She followed him to the barn where a chestnut mare lay in the straw, sides heaving. The sight made Penelope's heart clench. She knew little about horses, but she knew suffering when she saw it. "What do you need me to do?" For the next 3 hours, Vince talked her through helping with the difficult birth. She held the mare's head, speaking softly to her while Vince worked to reposition the foal. His knowledge and calm competence were remarkable. He never panicked, never grew frustrated, just kept working with steady, careful hands. Finally, as the sun was setting, the foal was born. A little filly, wet and shaking but alive. The mare immediately began cleaning her baby, and Penelope felt tears streaming down her face at the sight. "You did good," Vince said, looking at her over the mare's back. His face was streaked with sweat despite the cold, his shirt sleeves rolled up. "Could not have managed without you." "That was the most amazing thing I have ever seen," Penelope said, wiping at her eyes. "New life just like that." It never gets old, he agreed. He came around to where she stood, and without thinking, she hugged him. Just threw her arms around him and held on, overwhelmed with emotion. He went still for a moment, then his arms came around her, holding her steady. They stood like that, in the dim barn with the smell of hay and horses around them, while the foal took her first wobbling steps. When Penelope finally pulled back, she could not quite meet his eyes. "I am sorry. I did not mean to." "Do not apologize," he said, his voice rough. Nothing to apologize for. But there was. She was a widow of barely a month, embracing another man, feeling things for another man that she had never felt for her own husband. It was wrong. It had to be wrong. Except it did not feel wrong. It felt like the first right thing in a very long time. Christmas approached, and with it, a new tension in the house. They were both trying so hard to maintain proper distance, proper decorum, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Every accidental touch, every shared glance across the dinner table, every evening spent by the fire felt charged with possibility. On Christmas Eve, Vince came home from town with a small pine tree tied to his saddle. "Thought we should mark the occasion," he said, almost shyly. "If you want to, that is." Penelope felt her throat tighten with emotion. Thomas had never bothered with Christmas trees or celebrations, said they were a waste of time and money. "I would love to." They spent the evening decorating the tree with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Penelope made from old newspapers. It was simple, almost childlike, but it filled her with a joy she had not felt in years. "I have something for you," Vince said as they stood back to admire their work. He pulled a small package from his pocket, wrapped in brown paper. "It is not much, but I thought you might like it." With trembling fingers, Penelope unwrapped the package. Inside was a beautiful silver hair comb, simple but elegant, etched with a delicate floral pattern. "Vince, it is too much," she breathed. "It is not too much. Not for everything you have done making this house a home these past weeks." He hesitated, then added, "And because I wanted to give you something beautiful. You deserve beautiful things, Penelope." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her, who had taken her in and treated her with kindness and respect when he could have taken advantage. This man who was looking at her now with such open longing that it made her heart race. "I do not have anything for you," she whispered. "You have given me more than you know." He reached out, gently touching her face. "These weeks with you here, they have been the best I have had in longer than I can remember. I know it is too soon. I know you are grieving and need time, but I need to tell you, Penelope. I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. She should pull away, should tell him it was impossible, inappropriate, should remind him that she was barely a widow, that people would talk, that it was all too fast and too complicated. Instead, she said, "I am falling in love with you too." His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Then I have another question for you, and you can say no, I will understand if you do, but I have to ask." "What question?" "Marry me, Penelope. I know it is fast. I know people will talk even more than they already are, but I do not care about any of that. These past weeks have shown me what my life could be with you in it. I do not want to wait. I do not want to pretend anymore that you are just my housekeeper. I want you to be my wife." Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Vince, I was not a good wife to Thomas. I did not love him the way I should have. What if I am not capable of being what you need?" "You did not love Thomas because he did not earn your love," Vince said fiercely. "I have watched you these past weeks. The way you care for everything and everyone around you. The way you find joy in small things. The way you laugh and work and live. You are capable of so much love, Penelope. I see it every day. And I want to spend the rest of my life earning that love from you." Tears were streaming down her face now. When? Christmas Day. Tomorrow. I can ride to town first thing in the morning, get the minister to come out. Charlie can stand as witness and his wife if she is willing. I know it is not a fancy wedding, but I want to start our life together right away. I want you to be my wife by Christmas night. It was insane. It was too fast. It was everything proper society would condemn. It was also the most right thing Penelope had ever felt in her entire life. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. He kissed her then, slow and sweet and full of promise. Nothing like the perfunctory kisses Thomas had given her. This was a kiss that made her toes curl and her heart soar. This was what it was supposed to feel like. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Vince rested his forehead against hers. I will make you happy, Penelope. I swear it. You already have. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the sun glittering off fresh snow. Vince rode to town at first light and returned 3 hours later with the minister, Charlie's wife Maud, and 2 townswomen who apparently felt it was their Christian duty to ensure everything was proper and above board. Penelope wore her best dress, a simple blue wool that brought out her eyes, with the silver comb Vince had given her nestled in her dark hair. Vince wore his Sunday clothes, his hair neatly combed and face freshly shaved. They looked at each other across the small parlor like they were the only 2 people in the world. The ceremony was brief, the minister clearly uncomfortable with the speed of events, but unwilling to refuse a marriage that would make an improper situation proper. Penelope barely heard the words. She was too focused on Vince's face, on the way he looked at her like she was something precious beyond measure. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Vince kissed her with such tenderness that one of the townswomen actually sighed. They shared a simple Christmas dinner with their small group of witnesses, and then everyone headed back to town before the weather could turn. Charlie returned to his quarters in the barn with a knowing smile and a tip of his hat to the newlyweds, and then they were alone. Penelope stood in the middle of the parlor, suddenly nervous. She had been married before, but this felt entirely different. This mattered in a way her first wedding never had. Vince took her hand, his touch gentle. We do not have to rush anything. I meant what I said. I want you to be comfortable and happy. I am happy, she said truthfully, and maybe a little nervous. So am I, he admitted with a slight smile. I have thought about this moment so much over the past weeks, and now it is here and I feel like a green kid. She laughed softly. We will figure it out together. And they did. Slowly, carefully, with more tenderness than Penelope had known existed. Vince took his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When they finally came together, it was nothing like the hasty, uncomfortable encounters she had known with Thomas. This was beautiful. This was what she had always thought love should be. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, which was now their bed, and Penelope felt more content than she ever had in her life. Mrs. Sawyer, Vince murmured against her hair. How does that sound? Perfect, she said. It sounds perfect. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. They worked together during the days, managing the ranch and caring for the animals. In the evenings, they would cook together, play cards, read aloud from the few books Vince owned, or simply sit by the fire talking about everything and nothing. And at night, they would retire to their shared bed and discover each other over and over again. Vince was an attentive lover, always making sure Penelope found pleasure before seeking his own. He would whisper how much he loved her, how beautiful she was, how lucky he felt to have found her. And she would hold him close and marvel at how different life could be with someone who truly cared. News of their quick marriage spread through Hamilton, of course. Some people were scandalized, calling it indecent for a widow to remarry so quickly. Others were more understanding, recognizing the practical necessity of the match. Penelope found she did not care much either way. She was happy, truly happy, for the first time in her life. In February, Charlie approached Vince with news that he would be moving on in the spring. His brother had written offering him a partnership in a freight business in Colorado. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. "I hate to leave you short-handed," Charlie said, hat in his hands, "but Maud is excited about being near her sister in Denver." "I understand," Vince assured him. "We will manage." And truth be told, with Penelope here, the ranch runs smoother than it ever did when I was batching it. After Charlie left, Vince turned to Penelope. "What do you think about selling your old place? Using the money to expand here, maybe hire another hand or two come spring." Penelope considered this. The cabin and land that had been hers and Thomas's felt like a lifetime ago now. She had no desire to return there, no attachment to the memories. "I think that makes sense," she said. "This is my home now, our home." "Our home," he repeated, pulling her close. "I like the sound of that." March brought the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass beneath. The foal they had helped birth in December was growing strong and healthy. The chickens started laying more regularly, and Penelope noticed other changes too. Her monthly courses, usually reliable, were late. She waited another week before saying anything, wanting to be sure. Finally, one evening as they were getting ready for bed, she took Vince's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think I am pregnant," she said softly. His eyes went wide, his hand pressing gently against her belly. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but fairly sure. All the signs are there." "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." He looked up at her, his eyes shining. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared," she admitted, "but happy, so happy." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. Penelope, this is the best news. You are not worried about the responsibility, about how it will change things." "Of course I am worried," he said, "but I am also thrilled. I want a family with you. I want children running around this house, filling it with noise and laughter. I want to build a life with you that is so full of love it spills over." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into it. This man had saved her in every way a person could be saved. He had given her a home, a purpose, and now a family. She had gone from widow to wife in a matter of weeks, and while the speed might have been shocking to outsiders, for her it felt like the natural order of things. She had not been meant to stay married to Thomas. She had been meant to find Vince. In April, they sold Penelope's old property to a young couple moving west from Ohio. The money was enough to buy more cattle and hire 2 new hands to help run the expanding ranch. Vince was talking about building an addition onto the house, more bedrooms for the growing family he hoped they would have. The doctor confirmed Penelope's pregnancy in May. She was healthy, the baby was healthy, and everything was progressing as it should. The birth would likely be in late September or early October. "A harvest baby," Vince said with a grin when she told him the timeline. "Perfect timing for a rancher's kid." Summer was busy with all the work of running the ranch, but Vince was careful not to let Penelope overdo things. He took on more of the heavy chores, insisting she rest when she was tired and making sure she was eating well. Charlie had left as planned in April, but the 2 new hands, brothers named Jack and Robert, were proving capable and reliable. In August, Vince's sister Clara came to visit from Denver, where she lived with her husband. She had heard about Vince's sudden marriage and wanted to meet the woman who had captured her brother's heart. Penelope was nervous about the meeting, worried that Clara would judge her for the speed of her remarriage or find her lacking in some way. But Clara turned out to be warm and kind, with Vince's same gray eyes and easy manner. "I cannot tell you how happy I am that he found you," Clara told Penelope as they sat on the porch shelling peas while Vince and Clara's husband talked horses in the barn. He has been alone too long. Our parents died when he was 22, and he has been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders ever since. It is good to see him smile again, to see him happy. He makes me happy too, Penelope said softly. I know people think it was too fast, but I cannot imagine my life without him now. Love does not follow a timeline, Clara said wisely. When you know, and anyone with eyes can see that you two are meant for each other. Clara stayed for a week, and by the time she left, Penelope felt like she had gained not just a sister-in-law but a true friend. They promised to write regularly and to visit once the baby was born. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing for winter. Vince was obsessive about making sure they had enough wood, enough food supplies, enough of everything. He would not let them be caught unprepared like Thomas had been. I will not lose you, he told Penelope one night, his hand resting on her swollen belly. I will keep you safe, both of you. I promise. I know you will, she assured him. I trust you completely, Vince. She went into labor on a clear October morning, 2 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted, but not worryingly so. Vince sent Jack racing to town to fetch the doctor and Maud's replacement, a midwife named Mrs. Patterson, who had agreed to attend the birth. The labor was long and difficult. Penelope had never been so grateful for Vince's steady presence. He stayed with her the whole time, despite Mrs. Patterson's initial protests that birthing was women's business. He held Penelope's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, and talked her through each contraction with the same calm competence he had shown with the foaling horse. You can do this, he told her as evening fell and she was beginning to despair. You are the strongest person I know, Penelope. Just a little longer. And then, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, their son was born. A healthy, squalling baby boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Vince cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. He is perfect. Penelope, he is absolutely perfect. She was crying too, exhausted and overwhelmed and so full of love she thought she might burst. What should we name him? They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Now, holding their son, the answer seemed obvious to both of them. Thomas, Vince said softly. We should name him Thomas, to honor your first husband but also to give our son his own legacy. Thomas Sawyer. Penelope looked at him in surprise. She had never expected Vince to suggest naming their child after Thomas. Are you sure? I am sure. Thomas Jensen brought you to Wyoming. Without that, I never would have met you. He deserves to be remembered even if the marriage was not what either of you wanted. And our son can make the name mean something new, something better. Thomas Sawyer, Penelope repeated, looking down at the tiny face of her son. I think it is perfect. The first year of Thomas's life was a blur of sleepless nights and constant work, but also profound joy. Vince was a doting father, always eager to hold his son, to rock him when he cried, to make funny faces that would earn toothless smiles. Penelope had never seen anything as beautiful as her husband with their baby. The ranch continued to prosper. They added more cattle, bought better breeding stock for the horses, and even started a small vegetable garden that Penelope tended with Thomas strapped to her back. The two hands, Jack and Robert, proved invaluable, and by the time Thomas was walking, Vince was talking about expanding again. We could buy the parcel to the north, he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching Thomas toddle around the yard. Connect it to ours and have one of the biggest spreads in this part of Wyoming. Are we ready for that? Penelope asked, though she could hear the excitement in his voice and found it infectious. I think so. With the cattle prices holding steady and the horse breeding program doing well, We could manage it. And I want to build something lasting, Penelope. Something we can pass down to Thomas and any other children we might have. Other children. She looked at him with a raised eyebrow. He grinned, pulling her close. Well, I was hoping Thomas might have some brothers and sisters eventually, if you are willing, that is. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their son chase a butterfly through the grass. I am willing, very willing. And so their life continued, marked by hard work and small joys and love that grew deeper with each passing year. When Thomas was 2, Penelope gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Sarah and Catherine. Vince had been beside himself with joy, convinced he was the luckiest man alive. The twins were followed 2 years later by another son, James, and then 2 years after that by a final daughter, Ruth. 5 children in all, filling the expanded house with noise and laughter just as Vince had wanted. There were hard times too, of course. A drought one summer that nearly broke them. A winter when the flu swept through and they feared for the children's lives. The constant worry that came with ranching in a harsh land. But they faced everything together, Vince and Penelope, partners in every sense of the word. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vince took Penelope's hand across the dinner table with their 5 children chattering around them and said, "Do you ever regret it, marrying me so fast?" She did not even have to think about her answer. Not for one single moment. "You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me love and a family and a home. How could I regret any of that? I am glad," he said softly, "because you gave me everything too. I was just existing before you came into my life. You taught me how to live, how to love. You made me a better man, Penelope. You were always a good man, Vince Sawyer. I just gave you someone to be good for." That night, after the children were asleep, they lay in bed together as they had so many nights before. Penelope traced the lines on Vince's face, the few strands of gray that were starting to show in his dark hair. "Tell me the story again," she said softly. "About the day we met," he smiled, knowing which story she meant. He had told it 100 times to the children, making it into a grand romantic tale. But when it was just the 2 of them, it was different, more honest. "I rode up to a little ranch buried in snow," he began, his voice low and tender. "And I saw a woman standing there with a rifle, scared and alone and trying so hard to be brave. And I thought, that is the strongest person I have ever seen. That is someone I want to know. That is someone I want to protect and cherish and love." "You did not think all that right away," she protested, as she always did. "Maybe not in those exact words," he conceded, "but I felt it. From that very first moment, something in me recognized something in you. Like we were supposed to find each other, even if it took a blizzard and a tragedy to make it happen." "Do you think Thomas would approve?" She asked the question sometimes, when she was feeling reflective. "Of us, of how things turned out." Vince was quiet for a moment. "I think Thomas would be glad you were taken care of, and I think he would be honored that we named our son after him. Beyond that, what matters is that we built a good life, a happy life. That is all anyone can hope for." She nodded against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you, Vince Sawyer, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. And I love you, Penelope Sawyer. You made me a husband, a father, a better man. You made me whole." They fell asleep that way, tangled together, surrounded by the life they had built. The years continued to pass. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Thomas, the eldest, showed a natural aptitude for ranching and seemed destined to take over the operation someday. Sarah inherited her mother's way with growing things and was always in the garden. Catherine loved the horses and could ride before she could properly walk. James was the studious one, always reading and asking questions about everything. And Ruth, the baby, was a force of nature who kept them all on their toes. Vince and Penelope watched their children grow with pride and wonder. They worked hard to give them opportunities, to teach them both the practical skills they would need and the values that mattered. Honesty, kindness, hard work, and above all, love. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. But success never changed who Vince and Penelope were at their core. They remained humble, hardworking people who never forgot where they had come from or how lucky they were to have found each other. When Thomas, their eldest, turned 18, he came to his parents with news. He wanted to court Emma, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Vince and Penelope gave their blessing, remembering their own unconventional beginning and knowing that love could not be dictated or controlled. "Just make sure you truly love her," Penelope advised her son. "Marriage is hard work even when you love someone. Make sure you are willing to do that work." "I am, Ma," Thomas assured her. "She is the one. I know it the same way you and Pa knew it." 2 years later, Thomas and Emma were married in the parlor of the ranch house, in the same spot where Vince and Penelope had spoken their own vows. Standing there watching their son begin his own life, Penelope felt the circle completing itself. From tragedy to joy, from loss to love, from widow to wife to mother and beyond. That night, after all the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Vince and Penelope sat on the porch as they often did. They were older now, in their early 40s, with the marks of a hard life lived well. But they still held hands like newlyweds, still found comfort in each other's presence. "You remember what you said to me that first Christmas Eve?" Penelope asked, looking out at the land that was theirs. "When you proposed, I said a lot of things that night. You said you wanted to spend your life earning my love. I remember." She turned to look at him, her eyes serious. "You earned it long ago, Vince. You earned it that first day when you took care of Thomas's body with such respect. You earned it when you offered me a home with no expectation of anything in return. You earned it every day since with your kindness and your patience and your love. You earned it 1,000 times over." His eyes were bright with emotion. "And you earned mine. Every single day you earned mine." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, their legacy, their life together. It had started with a blizzard that made her a widow overnight and a stranger cowboy who made her a wife by Christmas. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of second chances and the beauty of finding the right person at the right time. Inside the house, they could hear their children settling in for the night. Thomas and his new bride had their own place now, but the other 4 were still at home, still filling the house with life and noise and love. Soon enough, they would grow and leave too, starting their own lives and families. But for now, this moment, everything was perfect. No regrets. Vince asked, as he sometimes still did even after all these years. "Not a single one," Penelope answered, as she always did. "You gave me everything, Vince. Everything that matters." He kissed her then, sweet and tender, the kind of kiss that spoke of a love tested by time and found true. They had faced down blizzards and droughts, illness and hardship, the endless challenges of life on the frontier. And they had done it together, hand in hand, heart to heart. As they went inside for the night, Vince paused to look back at the land one more time. "You know what the best part is?" He said. "What? We still have so many more years ahead of us, so many more memories to make. This is not the ending, Penelope. It is just another beginning." She smiled and took his hand, pulling him inside toward their warm home, their family, their life. "Then let us make it a good one." And they did. They lived long, happy lives filled with love and laughter, hard work and deep satisfaction. They watched all their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They became grandparents many times over, the patriarch and matriarch of a large, loving family. Vince remained Penelope's great love until his final breath at the age of 78, dying peacefully in his sleep with her hand in his. And Penelope, who had been made a widow twice in her life, carried his love with her through her remaining years, never forgetting the cowboy who had saved her life and given her a love beyond measure. Their story became legend in Hamilton, Wyoming, told and retold through generations. The woman who lost everything in a blizzard and found everything she needed in a stranger's kindness. The man who saw past grief and circumstances to the strong, beautiful woman beneath. The love that bloomed in the harshest of winters and lasted through every season that followed. And every Christmas, their descendants would gather at the old ranch house and raise a toast to Vince and Penelope Sawyer, whose love story proved that sometimes the most beautiful things can grow from the darkest moments, and that home is not a place but a person who sees you, knows you, and chooses to love you anyway. The ranch itself continued to thrive through the generations, passed down from Thomas to his children and grandchildren, each one carrying forward the legacy of hard work, integrity, and love that Vince and Penelope had established. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the heart of it remained the same. The parlor where two desperate, lonely people had spoken vows on Christmas Day, 1877, became a shrine of sorts, kept original, where every new couple in the family was encouraged to begin their own journey. On the wall hung the original marriage certificate, yellowed with age, and beside it, the silver hair comb Vince had given Penelope that first Christmas Eve. These were the sacred objects of the family's history, reminders that love can be found in the most unlikely circumstances. Penelope lived to the remarkable age of 86, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who all adored her. In her final days, lying in the same bed she had shared with Vince for so many years, she was lucid and at peace. Her youngest daughter Ruth, now middle-aged herself, sat beside her mother's bed. "Are you afraid, Mama?" she asked softly. Penelope smiled, her eyes already looking toward something beyond. "No, sweetheart. I am going to see your father again. After all these years apart, I finally get to be with him. How could I be afraid of that?" "Tell us the story one more time," Ruth said. "About how you and Pa met." And so Penelope told it one last time, her voice growing weaker but her memory clear. She told of the blizzard and finding Thomas frozen, of the desperation and loneliness. She told of Vince riding up like something out of a dream, solid and kind and safe. She told of the whirlwind courtship that lasted only weeks, of speaking vows on Christmas Day with snow sparkling outside the windows. "People said it was too fast," Penelope said, her breathing labored now. "They said it was inappropriate, scandalous even, but I knew. From almost the first moment I knew. Your father was my person, the one I was meant to find, and I would not have changed a single thing about how it happened because it brought me to him." She closed her eyes then, a smile on her weathered face. 50 good years we had together. 50 years of love and laughter and life. And now I get forever with him. Now I get to go home. Those were Penelope's last words. She slipped away peacefully in her sleep that night, just as Vince had years before. And the family she left behind, that enormous, sprawling family that had all started with one impulsive Christmas Day wedding, mourned her passing but celebrated her life. They buried her beside Vince in the family plot on a hill overlooking the ranch. The gravestone read, "Penelope Jensen Sawyer, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She found love in a blizzard and built a legacy in the warmth that followed." And so the story came full circle. From widow to wife, from stranger to soulmate, from one cold December day to a lifetime of warmth and love. Vince and Penelope Sawyer had proven that sometimes the greatest love stories are not the ones that follow all the rules, but the ones that break them for all the right reasons. In Hamilton, Wyoming, their memory lived on not just in the family they created, but in the community they had been part of. The Sawyer Ranch remained a landmark, a symbol of what could be built when two people committed to facing life together. Young couples would sometimes drive out to see the old house, to stand where Vince and Penelope had stood and make their own promises. And on Christmas Eve, if you listened carefully, some said you could still hear laughter coming from the old house, the sound of joy and love that had soaked so deeply into the walls that it could never be completely silent. The laughter of two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and created the best of lives. Their story became more than just a family legend. It became part of the fabric of Hamilton itself, a reminder that love and hope and human connection can triumph over any hardship. That second chances are real and precious. That sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you truly need. And every Christmas, as snow fell soft and white over the Wyoming landscape, people would think of the widow and the cowboy, the blizzard and the vows, the tragedy that became the beginning of something beautiful. They would think of Vince and Penelope Sawyer and believe, just a little more firmly, in the possibility of love, because that is what their story gave to everyone who heard it: possibility. The possibility that no matter how dark things seem, no matter how lost you feel, somewhere out there is the person who will see you, know you, and love you exactly as you are. The person who will turn your worst day into the first day of your best life. That was the true legacy of Vince and Penelope Sawyer. Not just the ranch or the family or the material success, but the hope. The evidence that love, real love, does exist, that it can be found in the most unexpected places and times. That it is worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth risking everything for. And so their story lived on, generation after generation, a beacon of light in the darkness, a promise that no winter lasts forever and that spring always comes, bringing with it new life, new hope, and new love. The blizzard had made her a widow overnight, but it had also brought her the cowboy who would make her a wife by Christmas. And in the end, that made all the difference.